What's up, vinyl community? I'm so glad you had a chance to pop by and say, hey, welcome to Dad's on a Budget Vinyl. My name is Mark. I really appreciate you popping by. There's a lot of stuff that you could be watching, and I appreciate you spending time with me. Today, I want to talk about Stephen Stills. Steve Stills is one of my favorite musicians. Lyricist, songwriter, guitar player, vocalist. I have been all in with Stephen Stills from the get go. It has been somewhat of a frustrating ride. His career has been a little bit hit and miss, not necessarily always his fault. There are times when he was right there and then had to start over, and right there and then had to start over. But man, the music that we got out of this wonderful career. I am a completist, but I don't have everything when it comes to Stephen Stills. But we're going to start at the very beginning and kind of work our way to somewhat present day. Stephen Stills is a musician's musician, and it used to drive me crazy because like guitar player would have the top ranked guitar listing, and one, two, and three would always be Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, and Stephen Stills would be down there like around 10, 11, 12. But golly, man, all those players, the aforementioned players, they couldn't wait to play with Stills if they had a chance, whether it was just hanging out jamming after a show or actually hanging out with the tape rolling. It's said that somewhere there's about 18 hours of Jimi Hendrix and Stephen Stills just jamming. They were having such a good time, and the music sounded so good that they just couldn't stop. So I want to take a deep dive into this music, and of course we know a lot of this stuff, but I just want to highlight a few things. Stephen Stills has lived, pretty much all over the world. He was born in Dallas, but moved away relatively early. He's lived in Florida. He's lived in Louisiana. He's lived in Costa Rica. He's lived all over the place, and everywhere that he lived, he absorbed part of the local flavor. He loved the blues that he ran into in the South. He's pretty sure that as pretty much a kid, he saw Tampa Red playing in Florida on a street corner and walked over and sat down and hung out with him for hours. Tampa supposedly showed him how to use a pocket knife to play slide guitar. But when he was in Costa Rica, he picked up on those rhythms, those Latin rhythms, and certainly used that to great effect later on in his career. Early on, he got a gig with the Go Singers, which were named after the Cafe Au Go. They were a vocal group. And learned his harmony chops pretty early on, and whether it was an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar, it seemed like he really couldn't get enough. It has been said of Stephen Stills that if you dropped him in the desert with nothing more than the clothes on his back, within an hour he would find a bottle of whiskey and a guitar and someone to play with. So with no further ado, let's talk about Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills, when he was with the Go Singers, there was an offshoot of that group called The Company. Richie Furry was a member, Steve Stills was a member. They were on a tour of Canada, and I believe it was in Winnipeg. Came across Neil Young playing with his band at the time, the Squires. This would have been about 65. Stephen really loved what Neil was doing on stage. Neil was already playing folk songs with an electric guitar. That's exactly what Stephen Stills wanted to do. When he saw Neil, he was like, "Man, I haven't played an electric guitar in years," because everything was folky and acoustic, strummy strum, and that type of thing. And then there's Neil just kind of shredding it. So he hung around after the show. They became buddies and talked and played, and I think went and got a bottle of something something and had a ball, according to Stephen Stills, quote unquote. But that was that. That was a night in the day, and they both went back to their respective thing. Before long, the company broke up, and Stephen Stills was on his own, hanging out. Had Richie Furry with him. That's an incredible story too. Richie Furry had been trying to find Stephen Stills for a while, didn't have an address for him. Wrote a letter, a handwritten letter, and sent it to his dad in El Salvador, trying to find out where Stills was. The letter came back with a post mark. He was at like a penny short on his postage, so he paid that penny and resent the letter, and ended up getting a letter back from Stephen's dad saying he was in Los Angeles or somewhere around there. So Richie Furry took off, found Stephen Stills out there. Stephen had told him that he had a band together because he was afraid that he would bail if he didn't tell him that he had a band. Richie got out there and found Stephen in a little bitty apartment by himself, but very much doing his thing and writing songs and getting his chops up, and Richie could recognize the greatness and hung around. One day, Stephen Stills was kind of getting a little bit fidgety for not being able to really put together anything in Los Angeles. And he was wanting to head to San Francisco, headed down the Sunset Strip and headed the other way. The story is Richie Furry went to go brush a fly off of his arm and saw a black hearse headed the other way on the strip. And Stephen Stills said, "I know that," and they busted a U-turn, caught up with the black hearse, and of course driving was Neil Young, and he also had Bruce Palmer with him, both Canadian expats, and so they were in the area looking for Stephen Stills. So it's crazy that they met that way. They pulled off to the side of the road in a gas station parking lot, and there pretty much decided to form a band right there on the side of the road. And that was 4/5 of Buffalo Springfield. That was Stephen Stills, Neil Young, Bruce Palmer, Richie Furry, and wasn't long before they hooked up with Dewey Martin. Now, Dewey Martin was really already a professional musician. He had played with the Dillards and quite a few other people, but he had just been let go of the Dillards. He wanted to go back to a little bit more of a natural organic sound, didn't really need a drummer. And so Dewey actually had to audition for the Springfield, which he almost blew him off, but decided, let me go see what they've got going on, and went and hung out with them and rehearsed with them. They had a great time. At that point, there's two different stories. One is that they walked outside to take a break, and there was a street paver across the street made by the Buffalo Springfield Company. The other story is that a couple of the guys had actually stolen a sign off of the steamroller and hung it in the house that they were rehearsing in, and they were trying to come up with the name, and one of them said, "How about that, Buffalo Springfield?" And the rest is history. Buffalo Springfield. There's a really great story. They got together. Before long, Chris Hillman of the Byrds popped by to see what all the hullabaloo was about, because within the musicians circle, they were already starting to make some waves. Chris Hillman really liked the band, and he ended up talking the owner of the Whiskey A Go Go into giving the Buffalo Springfield a shot. They played one night and slayed it, and they ended up giving them a 6-week run. And in that 6 weeks, their reputation really grew and grew and grew. The lines got longer and longer and longer around the block. Apparently those shows and the electricity between Stephen Stills and Neil Young and the way that they would trade off on lead, plus they were very interesting. You had Stephen Stills in his cowboy hat and his leather vest, and looking very much the country gentleman with his huge Gretsch guitar. You had Neil Young with his Comanche war shirt, looking very much like the modern Native American hippie. You had Richie Furry in his Nehru jackets, and you had Dewey Martin playing the drum kit with his ruffled ties, And then you had, Bruce Palmer, who was like 6'4", 6'5", standing there playing his bass with his little Jewish skull cap on. So they were quite a sight to see. But the music was fantastic, and based on how well those shows went at the Whiskey, of course the record companies started calling, and basically there was a $5,000 offer. That was up to a $12,000, and finally Ahmet Ertegun, who had come from Atlantic Records to see them play, thought they were great, fell in love with them, and offered them a record deal and a $22,000 advance. These guys have been living on mustard sandwiches for quite a while, so they said, yep, and they signed up, and there we go. Um, you know, their first record was released on Atco, and it got some airplay. You have to remember this is 1966. New music is coming out from everywhere, right? The first single from the record was "Go and Say Goodbye," which is a still song. It's a great song, um, but it just really wasn't getting enough airplay. And so there's a story that David Crosby, who had been hanging out with Lennon McCartney in London, they had played Crosby a demo tape of A Day in the Life. One side of the cassette was the demo of A Day in the Life. The second side of the cassette was Paul McCartney's brother Mike doing kind of like a little spoken word skit about losing his mind or something crazy like that. They gave that tape to David Crosby. He brought it back over to the States. One of the first people that he played it for was Stephen Stills, who loved it. Everybody loved the Beatles at that point in time. Um, so the idea is that Stills told his managers at the time about that tape. Those managers hired a lady of the evening to have a little tryst with David Crosby. And after Crosby fell asleep, she snagged the tape. Now it's in their hands. They went to the local radio station, which was KJH, and they said, hey, and KJH was that station that everybody was waiting. Everybody in that scene in California at that time listened to, are they going to play my record? Are they going to? And we're talking about the Byrds, we're talking about Mamas and Papas, and all kinds of wonderful, wonderful bands and musicians that were still relatively new trying to break into the scene. So it was a big deal to get played on that radio station. And these managers go to that station and they say, hey, we've got a Beatles, unreleased Beatles material on a cassette tape. And if you'll play a whole lot more Buffalo Springfield, we'll let you play this tape on the air. And that's what happened. They played the tape. They accredited both sides, even the Mike McCartney skit, to the Beatles, and started playing the heck out of Buffalo Springfield. So with their live show reputation, and now they're in heavy rotation, at least locally, they start to make some waves. Not long after that, Stephen Stills, sees what's going on Sunset Strip, and young kids being hassled because their hair's a little bit longer, or whatever the case may be. Writes a song about it for what it's worth, and the rest is history. That song was immediately a hit, put Buffalo Springfield on the map, and there we go. We're off and running. Now the cool thing, this is a wonderful record, and I feel like Buffalo Springfield is one of those American gems. I cherish the few records that we got from them. On this record, you've got For What It's Worth. You've got Go and Say Goodbye, Sit Down, I Think I Love You, Nowadays Clancy Can't Even Sing, Hot Dusty Roads, Everybody's Wrong, Flying on the Ground, Burned, Out of My Mind, Pay the Price. I mean, it's just for a debut record, 1966, it is absolutely wonderful. And of course, you guys know that, okay? It wasn't long before they came out with that second record. A lot of people think it's their best. Buffalo Springfield again. Again, this is on the Atco label. And what an iconic cover, and what a wonderful record. You've got you've got Neil Young writing great songs, and you've got Stephen Stills writing great songs, and Richie Fury doesn't write a whole lot of songs, but the ones that he writes are great. But you kick off with Mr. Soul, then you've got A Child's Claim to Fame, which is one of my favorite Furry songs. Then you've got Stephen Stills' Everydays. Yes ended up, the prog rock group Yes ended up doing a cover of Everydays, which is absolutely fantastic and kind of jazzy and ethereal. You've got one of my favorite Springfield tunes, Bluebird. You've got one of my favorite Neil Young tunes with Expecting to Fly, Hung Upside Down, Rock and Roll Woman, Broken Arrow, just an absolutely great record. Easily top 5 of that year, and that was a year that a lot of really, really, really good records came out. And of course you've got the Jack Nietzsche doing the arrangements, and just a wonderful, wonderful record. And you guys know this record, right? If you don't, you need to find out about it. So, man, at about that time, the Buffalo Springfield is really starting to take off. I mean, they had been critically acclaimed from the beginning, but now they're really starting to gain some momentum and some popularity, getting quite a bit of radio play. I mean, with Mr. Soul and Bluebird and Rock and Roll Woman, I mean, all 3 of those songs were all over the radio in '67. So, they're off and running, and then Neil Young decides he doesn't really want to do that anymore. He wants to go and make solo records, and he's had a great time, and thank you very much, but he's off and running. And so, the Springfield played Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. Neil Young's not there. David Crosby sat in for Neil Young, which was another nail in the coffin between him and the bad blood that was kind of simmering between him and the other members of the Byrds. But yeah, Neil decides that he's out of there. He's going to go do his thing. So before this record even comes out, Buffalo Springfield is done. 1966, 1967, and some of 1968. That's all we got. This is very appropriately titled Last Time Around. This came out in 1968. It's a wonderful record. And you guys know it too. And it's kind of funny. You've got the group photo, and everybody is unified and looking in one direction, with the exception of Neil Young, who's like, I wonder what's back there. I want to go check out what's back there. He's already thinking, right? You can see it. So this album, while not my favorite Springfield album, has a couple of my favorite Stephen Stills tracks. And those are Questions and 4 Days Gone. 4 Days Gone, about a draft dodger, one of the first songs that Stephen wrote. Questions is just an absolutely wonderful track. But this record is amazing. I think it's way ahead of its time. I think it was a great record. And, if they could have stayed together, we all love the Springfield, just wish we could have gotten some more music. And, back then they weren't recording everything. So, I mean, what we have is what we have. I mean, maybe Neil Young has some extra stuff. I know that he came out with a few kind of hidden gems over the course of his career. Neil Young loves to release archival material, of which he has a ton. And it's said that he's got a bunch of Springfield stuff somewhere. Neil, we want to hear it. In 1973, Atlantic came out, or Atco came out with this comp, and it's cool. And if you're a Springfield completist, which, I mean, it's only 4 records, you really kind of have to have this. And this is basically stuff that you've already got if you have the first 3 records. It does have the 9+ minute version of Bluebird, where when the band drops out and the banjo comes in, on this version the band drops out and Stephen Stills comes in with his electric, just like a rhino, and proceeds to jam for 3 or 4 minutes. And it's great, but I do like the original version better. So here we go, back to Last Time Around. I mean, it's 1968. One of the greatest American bands is disbanded. Stephen Stills, one of the greatest American musicians, is suddenly without a band. And, it's just I mean, you have to think that he could see how good they were and how great they sounded on record, how great they played and sounded live. And I'm sure he was absolutely crushed for the first time. He didn't sit on his haunches. He continued to make demos and try to play with everybody that he could. And in 1968, that same year, I gotta get a sip of my sweet tea. This record dropped, and this is Super Session with Mike Bloomfield and Al Kooper and Steve Stills. And of course, by then, Mike Bloomfield with Electric Flag, just killer guitar player. Al Kooper on that organ and other assorted things. And of course, we know him from, This Diamond Ring and all Blood, Sweat, and Tears and all the stuff that he had done. But the organ solo on Like a Rolling Stone. I mean, there's a Dylan box set that's got like 30 versions of Like a Rolling Stone, and you can kind of hear the way that song came together. They played it slower, they played it faster, but the version, the one, it didn't really come together until Al Kooper, just playing around in the studio, came up with that killer organ riff. So, and then you've got Steve Stills of Buffalo Springfield. So, this is a musician's record. It's basically a jam session. I remember when I bought it, I was initially disappointed because Stephen Stills only plays on side 2, and he doesn't handle any of the lead vocals. I love Stephen Stills playing. I love his guitar playing, both acoustic and electric. I love his lyrics. I love his songwriting. I really love his voice. Gravelly, bluesy, even at a young age. Could sing falsetto. I mean, just a really soulful singer. I think very underrated as a singer. So this album came out, really just these three guys having fun. It made a few waves within the musical circle. Musicians loved this record. The population not so much. The record buying population not so much. So Stephen Stills is kind of floundering around, wondering what to do. David Crosby has either left or been kicked out of the Byrds, depending on what story you read. Graham Nash of the Hollies, who had tremendous success with songs like Carousel and Bus Stop, and had great success in England, lots of hit singles, but was really tired of the commercial direction that the Hollies were heading in and wanted to do something a little bit new and different. So without really even having a game plan, he bailed from England and flew to LA. He had dreamed about those sunny skies and those palm trees. I think the story is somebody gave him acid on the plane. About the time he got to LA, he got his baggage and went out onto the tarmac and climbed a palm tree and didn't come down for like 8 hours. But anyway, it wasn't long before these three guys hooked up. Stephen Stills and David Crosby. I'd said before, Crosby had played with the Springfield at Monterey Pop, and they had hung out, and Stephen Stills had written a couple of acoustic tracks, You Don't Have to Cry and Helplessly Hoping. David Crosby came along and added his wonderful harmony, and they were a big part of the Laurel Canyon scene, and they were hanging out. And again, two separate stories. Some people say they were hanging out at Joni Mitchell's place. Some people say they were hanging out at Mama Cass Elliott's house, around her little pool that she had in the backyard. But either way, Stills has his acoustic guitar, and he and Crosby are sitting there showing off a couple of these new songs that they have, and Graham Nash is present, and they play Helplessly Hoping. And Graham Nash says, play it again. And they play it again. Graham Nash says, play it one more time. They play it again, and on this last time, Graham Nash comes in with that high harmony. And I'm sure that nipples could have cut glass sitting around that circle, hearing those three voices come together for the first time. Stephen Stills with his gravelly but right on the money lead. David Crosby with his wonderful way of doing that lower, almost a baritone harmony, and then Graham Nash coming in and laying that high layer on the top. It was an absolutely wonderful thing. It wasn't more than just a couple of weeks before they were in the studio in front of Ahmet Ertegun, who was a huge fan of all of the members of the Springfield, and he heard what these guys had to play and sing, and said, "Yep." And so, of course, the next record out is this debut record, Crosby, Stills and Nash. I guess one of the first super groups. Graham Nash from the Hollies, Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield, David Crosby from the Byrds. These three voices came together. Unlike now, there were harmony singers already, but this was organic. It was very rich. It was very beautiful, without being cheesy in like a Kingston trio kind of way. This record, there's Dallas Taylor peeking out of the back there. Oh, and check this out. I paid, if you can see that, I paid $1.25 for this record way, 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 way back in the day. I wanted to share with my wife the differences between vinyl and CD. And not long ago, we put this 50, 60-year-old record on and then played the CD version of it. And while the CD sounded cleaner, i.e. no surface noise, the vinyl blew it away. On this record, I mean, gosh, man, you've got great songs. You've got Sweet Judy Blue Eyes and Long Time Gone and Marrakesh Express and Pre-Road Downs, and but my favorite tracks easily are the Stephen Stills penned Helplessly Hoping, You Don't Have to Cry, 49 Reasons, his contribution to Wooden Ships. Those songs are absolutely fantastic. Now, Graham Nash and David Crosby played acoustic guitar. David Crosby plays a really mean rhythm guitar, and Graham Nash plays a little piano and guitar, but that's not what he's known for. He's known for his singing and his harmony. Stephen Stills on this record, acoustic guitar, electric bass, drums, piano, organ. He was nicknamed Captain Many Hands after this record because he was just so all over it. So, this album takes off. Within a couple of months, the band gets invited to play Woodstock. I have to say that it's because of the Woodstock movie that I became such a Stephen Stills fan. I love the Woodstock movie. I love the Who's performance and Canned Heat and 10 Years After. And I mean, there's several. Santana's performance blows it away, right? But the Crosby, Stills, and Nash performance. And Neil Young was there too, but that's another story. Ladies and gentlemen, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and right. But anyway, there the three of them are. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You've got one acoustic guitar played by Stephen Stills, and you've got those three wonderful voices, and they launch into Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. It is such an amazing performance. Absolutely amazing. It slayed me. I couldn't get enough of it. I think that Woodstock performance blows the album performance of the song Sweet Judy Blue Eyes away. I love it. I love the honesty of it. I love Stephen Stills calling for a little less bottom end on the guitar, please. I love at the end of it where they say, the crowd just erupts and you hear the applause coming in, and it's like, hey, thanks, we needed that. This is our second time in front of people. This is our second time in front of people, man. So, and of course these are all seasoned musicians, but they hadn't played. This was their second time to play live in front of an audience, and that audience was the 450,000 strong Woodstock audience, and they killed it. I love that performance. I thought it was definitive. It wasn't long after that Ahmet Ertegun came along and said, hey, you guys are beautiful, everything sounds wonderful, but you need to add a little bittersweet to the mix. And he was a big fan of Neil Young's going back to the Springfield days. he suggested that they get together. Neil Young was up for it, and they got together and came out with Deja Vu. Deja Vu is another one of those classic records that I'm sure all of you own. Um, Again, the songwriting on it is absolutely wonderful. I mean, I love Deja Vu. I love that's basically a David Crosby pen tune. I love Almost Cut My Hair, Our House, and those are great songs. But again, my favorite stuff is Stephen Stills' Carry On, and the way that that segues into Questions, that song from the Springfield, his version of Woodstock, the acoustic solo 4 and 20. I could have listened to 4 and 20. I mean, and I did over and over and over and over again. So we're going to move on because we've got a bunch of other records to talk about. But at this point, these guys are all superstars, okay? Neil Young's already made a solo record in 1970 and 71. Stephen Stills, David Crosby, and Graham Nash all came out with solo records. Song for Beginners with Graham Nash, If I Could Only Remember My Name from Crosby, and then the first Stephen Stills solo record. I love all three of those records, and I have all three of those records, and I love them for different reasons. But again, my favorite of the three different first solo records was this one, Stephen Stills solo record, 1970, Atlantic Records. Everybody that's anybody wanted to be on this record. Jimi Hendrix is on it. Eric Clapton's on it. David Crosby and Graham Nash are on it. But Rita Coolidge, John Sebastian, Cass Elliot, just a wonderful host of musicians. And this is a fantastic record. Now, of course, the solo from this, or the big single from this record, was Love the One You're With. I'm not a huge fan of that song. I don't think it's a very great philosophy. How many marriages have broken up because you couldn't be with the one that you loved, so you love the one that you're with? And so, but the rest of the record, Sit Yourself Down, the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh. Do for the Others. Black Queen, which is attributed to Jose Cuervo, Tequila, which is just Stills playing a mean, bad acoustic blues guitar. Wonderful record. Millions of them were printed, so you can still pick this up. But I love it. Those songs that I mentioned, I could hear over and over. They go on every Stills mix that I make. So here's where, in my opinion, we take our first step. This is with Stephen Stills too, and I love that. I love the cover. I love the inside photo. I remember a period where I wanted a pair of boots that looked just like the ones that he's wearing here, which are pretty sure the same ones he's wearing on the cover of Crosby, Stills and Nash. Stills, ever the outdoorist, the adventurer, comes out with this record, and it does have change partners, which I do like quite a bit. The rest of the record leaves me a little bit dry. I'm sorry, it just kind of does. I was a little bit disappointed when I picked this up because I thought his second record would be probably as good or better than his first. But I think that he realized that he had kind of had a miss with that record, and he really amped it up, put together his next group, got together with Chris Hillman of the Byrds, who I absolutely love, and came out with one of my favorite double records of all time. This is easily top 5 double albums, and it's right up there with the with the Beatles' White Album, with the Clash, London Calling, the Stones, Exile, Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde, Manassas. This is a fantastic record. It's a double record. This is Stephen Stills hooking up with, again, a host of really good musicians and coming out with music that's country, it's bluegrass, it's rock and roll, it's blues. As a matter of fact, it's 4 sides, and each side is given a different title to create a different feel. But as far as I'm concerned, Fallen Eagle, Jesus Gave Love Away for Free, Colorado, So Begins the Task, Hide It So Deep, Don't Look at My Shadow. That first side just absolutely kills you and makes you want even more. And then you flip it over and you've got It Doesn't Matter. The Chris Hillman, Stephen Stills Man, I love it. I love that song. I love the harmonies. And then you've got Johnny's Garden. At this point in time, Stephen Stills had purchased Peter Sellers' Old English home in England, and Johnny, the gardener, came with the purchase. And Johnny was a great guy. Stephen Stills wrote the song "Johnny's Garden" for him. It's one of my favorite Stephen Stills moments. You got "Bound to Fall," "How Far," and then you get into a little bit more rock and roll, and you've got "Song of Love," "Rock and Roll Crazies," "Jet Set Sigh," and then you end up with the blues side, which has got the fantastic Blues Man on it. This one is signed. I caught Stephen Stills live. I was thinking, what album can I take that I really, really want to get signed? Um, I, I started to go with the solo record, but I grabbed this at the last minute because I just cherished this record, and I think he was pretty happy that this was the one that I grabbed. I think that he sees this as one of his finer moments as well. Just real quick before we move on. Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Dallas Taylor from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and CSN, Paul Harris, Fuzzy Samuels on bass, Al Perkins on pedal steel, Joe Lala on percussion. Fantastic. Get it. You have to have it. Okay. The follow up to that record down the road, and I'm going to start to kind of speed up a little bit. I'm getting behind. Um, this record should have been great. It should have been great. It's got Joe Walsh on it, who was a big Stephen Stills fan as well. It should have been great. It's really not. It kicks off strong with "Isn't It About Time." Um, I like "Do You Remember the Americans." The rest of it's meh. It just doesn't really do it for me in the way that it should. And that was pretty much it for Manassas. Okay, Stills certainly didn't sit still. No pun intended. Continued to make really good quality solo records. This is Illegal Stills. You can see this is another one that I picked up for $1.25 way, way, way back in the day. This has the usual culprits on it. You've got Joe Lala on percussion. You've got the first appearance of Donnie Dacus backing him up on guitar. You've got Joe Vitale, George Perry. This is a wonderful record. It starts off with "Buying Time," which I think is a great song. Should have been a much bigger single. "The Loner," him paying homage to Neil Young through covering one of his songs. "State Line Blues," which is just one of my favorites. Okay, as far as the acoustic finger pick stuff that he does. So this is a great record, but it didn't sell a ton. People at that point, they didn't want to see a Stephen Stills record. They didn't want to see a David Crosby record. They didn't want to see a Graham. They want to see Crosby, Stills, and Nash. In 1974, to kind of capitalize on that popularity, the horrible tragedy at Kent State where 4 students are shot down, and Neil Young sees it on the news and immediately sits down and writes "Ohio." Obviously, it was rushed out as a single, was immensely popular, said what a lot of people had on their minds, and Atlantic wanted to capitalize on that, so they came out with the comp "So Far." The only new material on that was the remix of "Carry On" without the questions portion, and then "Ohio." The rest of it was stuff off of their, the first 2 records. They carry on. Illegal Stills. This is Stills. This came out in '76, and this is the first record where Donnie Dacus really gets the spotlight. Donnie Dacus ended up, after this record, he joined Chicago and was a big part of kind of breathing some fresh air into that band. By that point, Terry Kath, we had lost the brilliant Terry Kath. Donnie certainly didn't try to fill his shoes, but certainly helped him kind of lift things up. But this is another record that I think should have been better. I mean, I'm sorry, it's got "Turn Back the Pages," my favorite changes. I love that. I love Still's version of "As I Come of Age." I think I like it better than Neil's version. Shuffle just as bad. "To Mama" from Christopher and the Old Man. Chris Stills, remember that name here in a minute. There's a few songs on here that I really, really love, but as a whole, the album was a little bit weak. And Didn't sell as well as, So next up would be the CSN album, the Crosby, Stills and Nash album. Mine's a little bit crispy, but it still sounds great. This was recorded in '77, and I think the American music pop was really ready to hear some Crosby, Stills and Nash again. And there are some songs on here that really deliver. I love David Crosby's Shadow Captain, and I love Graham Nash's Just a Song Before I Go. By the way, check that song out. Stephen Stills plays a really awesome bass on that. But again, it's the songs, the Stills songs. I Give You Give Blind, Dark Star, Changes, See the Changes. Those are my favorite tracks. They always have been, and they probably always will be. And then, that was 1977, and then that was it for a while. I mean, I think in '79, CSN got together to play the No Nukes concert. They did, something here and there, but I just don't think they could get along very well by that point, and just kind of floundered. And of course, by then they had made a ton of money as well, so they weren't as motivated, I don't think, to get into the studio and create new music. However, in 1982, they got together for this record, Daylight Again. I've never loved this cover. I don't get the cover. To me, it has nothing to do with the music. But the record is pretty decent, and it gave Crosby, Stills and Nash a breath of fresh air. A couple of radio songs that were played pretty regularly on the radio. Southern Cross was a biggie. Wasted on the Way was a biggie. I think it's a decent record, but again, it's the Stephen Stills stuff that I love. Now, by this time, David Crosby had started to have some real problems. He had gone from pot and peace and love and that type of thing straight to crack cocaine, and I think it was 1985 that he was arrested in Dallas when he was playing, and his crack pipe vibrated off of the bass amp and smashed onto the floor, and Crosby threw a fit, and before long he's being let out in handcuffs. In my opinion, again, Stephen Stills is the man. He's the one that comes through. He's the one that gives us Southern Cross, Turn Your Back on Love, and then I absolutely love, it ends with Daylight Again, which is part A, Daylight Again, and part B, Find the Cost of Freedom, which we had gotten a little snippet of on the Four-Way Street record, the live record with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that came out in '71. This version blows it away. I love it when Stephen Stills writes about the Civil War and the South and things like that, and that song was a corker. I saw them on this tour. They were absolutely fantastic, but of course you could see that Crosby was struggling. 1983, they came out with Allies. This is a really weird little record. It's half studio, half live. The live stuff was recorded '77, '82, and '83. And so, it just, I don't know, it's kind of a weird little package. Again, it's the Still stuff though that really stands out. War Games, these guys are embracing synths and drum machines by now, but War Games is a studio track. It's okay. Raise the Voice is okay, but then it kicks into the live stuff. And the first live track is Turn Your Back on Love, which is phenomenal. And then side 2, track 2 is Blackbird. They do an acoustic version of, the Beatles' Blackbird. Stephen Stills' acoustic guitar just sounds so fantastic, instantly recognizable by that point, and that 3-part harmony on that song is wonderful. They had a minor hit with the live version of Wasted on the Way from this record, and then it finishes up with the awesome live version of For What It's Worth, done a little bit differently, slightly different beat, that type of thing. By the way, I think in 1990, 91, maybe later, I get my years mixed up, but Public Enemy and Stephen Stills got together for a remake of For What It's Worth, and it is phenomenal. Check it out, seek it out if you haven't heard it. Uh, Next up, 1984. We've got Stephen Stills, Right by You. So Stephen Stills, ever the, and I know I skipped a few, Thoroughfare Gap and a couple other ones. Always the ballsy adventurer. Here he is, pictured in the cigarette boat. There he is on the back cover. Faster, 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 right? This album, it hasn't aged very well, I have to tell you that. It's got Jimmy Page on it. All the other usual culprits, Joe Vitale and Joe Lala, and a couple other guests. The first song, 50/50s, kind of, Cuban riff. I like that song. I like the Jimmy Page solo on it, and then Stephen Stills comes in after Jimmy and just blows him away. That's really good. Flaming Heart's okay. No Problem's okay. No Hiding Place, kind of a return to some of the bluegrassy type of stuff that he was doing with Manassas. And then Right by You, which is a great song, but he gives the lead to Michael Finnegan. And I wish he had kind of kept that in his boat. That's where I stop, 1984. It was a long time before, in my opinion, Stephen Stills really put out more quality music. I do want to talk real quick about Stills Alone, and I've only got this on CD. This came out in 91, so it's a good 17 years between this and this, okay? However, whereas this suffers from an aged production and drum machines and synths and all of that type of stuff, this is all Stephen, all acoustic, his voice. By 1991, he's getting on up there, and his voice is just, perfect. His guitar playing is perfect. The sound of the guitar is perfect. So what I want to do is go out with a little bit of this. This record contains Treetop Flyer, which is one of my favorite Stills tunes. And apparently Ray LaMontagne was working in a shoe factory, and they played that song over, their PA system. He heard it and said, man, I'm out of here. That's what I want to do. So, still at this age, doing his thing, inspiring new musicians to pick up a guitar and to sing. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Stephen Stills, hats off to you. Many, many, many more. I love seeing him live. Every time I've seen him, he always delivers. He doesn't have the greatest reputation. I think when you're that talented, you can kind of turn into a bit of a control freak, and I think that's kind of how he's known. And I know that he's a little bit hot-headed. You can see that going all the way back to the footage of Crosby, Stills, and Nash at Big Sur, where the hippies are, making fun of CSN for having on their fur coats, and Stephen Stills is perfectly willing to ditch off that fur coat and go to knuckles with the guy that's poking fun at him. That's Stephen Stills. Here he is, cowboy hat, vest, jeans, cowboy boots, the real deal. So y'all, thanks for hanging out. This video's gone on for a while. Of course, I cut it pretty short. We could have talked about Stephen Stills for a while, but I'm going to pause for a moment, cue this up, let you hear a little bit of this, and then I'll talk to you next time. Hang on just a sec. This guitar, immediately recognizable.
Love is a secret that everyone knows. Love is a chime that rings when the wind blows. To keep yourself honest,
Recognizable.
so it
And
can
then you have
grow.
to hear a little bit of,
'Cause when you love,
that voice and that picking style.
I could be a rambler from the Seven Dials.
Right.
Don't pay taxes 'cause I never file.
Check it out. Stephen Stills, wonderful, wonderful singer, writer, lyricist, guitar player, Stephen Stills. One last little thing. This is his son, Chris Stills. looks just like him. Look at his hands, those massive hands that are able to finger pick so well. Stephen Stills is the son of, Chris Stills is the son of Veronica Sanson and Stephen Stills. Grew up in Paris and France most of his life, and he's pretty popular over there. Never really broke through over here, and I don't get it because this is a really good debut. It's called 100 Year Thing. I just the other day bought Folkocracy, the new Rufus Wainwright record, and one of my favorite songs on that is Harvest, a remake of Harvest with Andrew Bird and Chris Stills and Rufus Wainwright. If you haven't heard that, check it out. But Chris Stills carrying on the tradition. So thank you, Stephen, for your music. Thank you for your career. Thank you, vinyl community, for hanging out with me again, having some fun. I can't wait for the next video, the next time we get to chat about music. Leave me some comments. Let me know what you think about this stuff. Like and subscribe. Tell your buddies. I'd appreciate that. But mostly it's about this music and sharing it with each other. And I appreciate having an opportunity to do that tonight. All right, everybody sleep good. We'll talk to you later. Stephen Stills. Good night, everybody.